You stare at two options. Neither of them are terrible, but choosing one feels strangely heavy. So you delay. You research more. You think a little longer. You wait for clarity that never really arrives. Eventually, the moment passes. And later you quietly ask yourself, why is it so hard for me to decide simple things? Not just big life choices, even small ones. What if the real problem isn't indecision, but something your brain is trying very hard to avoid? Because behind many difficult decisions, there's a feeling most people rarely name: regret. Indecision rarely looks dramatic. It looks ordinary. You open 20 tabs while researching a purchase. You reread a message 3 times before sending it. You imagine different career paths, but struggle to choose one. From the outside, it seems like careful thinking. But inside, the experience feels different. There's tension, a quiet pressure in your chest. Your mind keeps asking, what if this is the wrong choice? So you keep comparing possibilities. Option A might be good, but what if B is better? Option B feels safer, but what if A leads somewhere more meaningful? The more you think, the more possibilities appear. Eventually, something strange happens. You stop trusting your own judgment. Psychologists sometimes call this decision paralysis, when too many imagined outcomes overwhelm the brain's ability to choose. But beneath the surface, something deeper is happening. Your mind isn't just trying to pick the best option, it's trying to avoid something painful. The feeling of looking back later and thinking, I should have chosen differently. And the brain takes that feeling very seriously. Most people interpret indecision as weakness. They think it means they lack confidence, or discipline, or clarity. But neuroscience suggests something more interesting. The brain is not wired to maximize perfect outcomes. It's wired to minimize emotional pain. And regret is one of the most powerful emotional signals the brain can imagine. In behavioral economics, this is called regret aversion. Humans naturally try to avoid choices that might lead to future regret, even if that means delaying action, or choosing safer paths, or not choosing at all. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. Regret helps the brain learn from mistakes, but the anticipation of regret can become overwhelming. Your mind starts simulating the future, running mental movies of what could go wrong. And if those simulations feel painful enough, the brain chooses the easiest solution: avoid deciding. But this protective instinct creates a paradox, because avoiding decisions can slowly create the very feeling you feared: regret. So the real question becomes, why does the brain imagine regret so vividly in the first place? Inside your brain, decision-making involves several systems. One of the most important is the prefrontal cortex. This region compares options and predicts possible outcomes. But there's another system involved, the anterior cingulate cortex. This part of the brain monitors errors and imagined mistakes. When you consider a decision, your brain runs simulations. What happens if you choose path A? What happens if you choose path B? Each possibility triggers emotional predictions. This process is called affective forecasting. Your brain attempts to estimate how future outcomes will feel. Here's the problem. The brain is biased toward negative prediction. It overestimates how painful future regret might be. Imagine your mind like a weather forecast system, but instead of predicting rain, it predicts emotional storms. What if this decision leads to disappointment? What if I miss a better opportunity? What if I look back and feel foolish? Because these forecasts feel real, the nervous system responds as if the regret has already happened. So the brain delays the decision. Not because you can't choose, but because your mind is trying to avoid stepping into a predicted emotional storm. But here's the hidden flaw in the system. The brain is actually terrible at predicting long-term regret. Psychology research repeatedly shows that humans adapt to outcomes faster than expected. What seems like a life-defining mistake often becomes just another chapter. But the mind doesn't know that yet. So it keeps trying to calculate the perfect path, and perfect paths rarely exist. Which brings us to the real question. How do you make decisions when your brain keeps predicting regret? 1. Shift from best to good enough. Most indecision comes from trying to find the optimal choice. Psychologist Herbert Simon called this the difference between maximizing and satisficing. Maximizers search endlessly for the best option. Satisficers choose an option that meets their core needs. What to do? Before deciding, define your 3 most important criteria. Once an option meets those criteria, choose it. Why it works. This reduces cognitive load in the prefrontal cortex. Your brain stops scanning endless possibilities. Example: instead of researching dozens of laptops, choose one that meets your budget, performance needs, and reliability. Once those boxes are checked, the decision is complete. 2. Shorten the decision window. When decisions stay open too long, the brain keeps simulating outcomes. This strengthens regret anticipation. What to do? Give yourself a time boundary. 10 minutes for small choices, 2 days for bigger ones. Why it works. Time limits force the brain to rely on intuitive judgment. Psychology research shows that intuition often integrates complex information efficiently. Example: if you're choosing between 2 restaurants, decide within 5 minutes. Waiting longer rarely improves the decision. Here's the mental model to remember. Your brain treats decisions like predicting weather. It scans the horizon for emotional storms. If the forecast looks risky, it delays leaving the house. But forecasts are not reality. They are guesses. And the longer you wait for perfect weather, the more life quietly moves forward without you. Decisions are rarely about finding the perfect path. They're about moving, learning, adjusting. Your brain doesn't need perfect predictions. It needs experience. Each choice becomes data. Each outcome becomes information. And gradually, the storms your mind once feared begin to look less threatening. If you've struggled with indecision, it doesn't mean you're weak. It often means your mind is thoughtful, careful, aware of consequences. But sometimes that awareness turns into hesitation, not because you lack direction, but because you're trying to avoid future regret. The quiet truth is this: regret is not always the result of making the wrong decision. Sometimes it comes from never making one. So the goal isn't perfect choices. It's gentle movement. One step, then another. And over time, something surprising happens. You begin to trust yourself again. Not because every decision worked out, but because you learned something deeper. That your life isn't built from perfect predictions. It's built from the courage to choose. And often, that first step is the only certainty you ever really needed.